The one emotion that completely dismantles an avoidant's ability to walk away is not love, passion, or even deep connection. It's safety. When an avoidant encounters someone who makes them feel genuinely safe on a nervous system level, it creates an addiction more powerful than any drug because it addresses their deepest, most fundamental need that they've been seeking their entire life. This isn't the superficial safety of being with someone predictable or non-threatening. This is the profound cellular level safety of being with someone who sees their attachment wounds and doesn't exploit them, who understands their triggers and doesn't activate them intentionally, who recognizes their emotional limitations and doesn't punish them for having boundaries. When an avoidant feels this kind of safety, their entire physiology changes. Their nervous system, which has been in a constant state of hypervigilance around intimacy, finally relaxes. The chronic tension they carry from always being ready to defend themselves or flee from emotional demands dissolves in the presence of someone who doesn't require them to be anything other than exactly who they are right now. This safety manifests in ways the avoidant has never experienced before. They find themselves sharing thoughts and feelings they've never told anyone else, not because they're being pressured to open up, but because the environment feels so secure that vulnerability happens naturally. They discover they can have needs, express concerns, and even show weakness without being judged, manipulated, or abandoned. The person who inspires this safety doesn't try to heal the avoidance wounds or fix their attachment issues. Instead, they create an environment where the avoidant can heal themselves at their own pace. They offer presence without pressure, understanding without advice, and acceptance without conditions for change. This allows the avoidant to experience what secure attachment actually feels like for the first time in their life. Once an avoidant has tasted this level of safety, everything else feels inadequate and dangerous by comparison. They realize they've been living in a state of chronic emotional stress and hypervigilance that they didn't even recognize as abnormal until they experienced its absence. The contrast is so stark that returning to relationships that don't provide this safety feels like voluntarily entering emotional combat zones. Why safety is more addictive than love for avoidance. Love often feels threatening to avoidance because it typically comes with expectations, demands for reciprocation, and implicit pressures to be more emotionally available than they feel capable of being. Love from others has historically meant suffocation, loss of autonomy, and overwhelming responsibility for someone else's emotional well-being. But safety is different because it doesn't require anything from them except their authentic presence. The person who makes them feel safe isn't asking them to be more emotionally expressive, more physically affectionate, or more committed than they naturally want to be. They're not being loved for their potential to change. They're being accepted for exactly who they are right now. This safety allows the avoidant to access their own capacity for love without the paralyzing fear that usually accompanies deep feelings. They can care deeply about someone without worrying that their caring will be weaponized against them, used to manipulate them, or leveraged to extract more emotional labor than they can comfortably provide. The addictive quality of this safety comes from the fact that it meets the avoidant's most fundamental psychological need, the need to maintain their sense of self while also experiencing connection. They've spent their entire life believing these two needs were mutually exclusive, that they had to choose between autonomy and intimacy, between self-preservation and love. When they find someone who allows them to have both simultaneously, it creates a psychological paradise they didn't know was possible. They experience the relief of being known and loved without the terror of being consumed or controlled. This combination is so rare and so precious to the avoidant that losing it feels like losing their only chance at sustainable happiness. How safety transforms the avoidant's attachment system. In the presence of someone who consistently provides emotional safety, the avoidant's entire attachment system begins to rewire itself. The neural pathways that have been firing danger, intimacy, equals suffocation for years start to develop new patterns that associate closeness with comfort rather than threat. This neurological transformation doesn't happen overnight, but when it begins, it's profound and lasting. The avoidant starts to experience intimacy as nourishing rather than draining, connection as energizing rather than exhausting, and vulnerability as strengthening rather than weakening. Their nervous system learns that it's safe to relax around this person, that defenses aren't necessary for survival. The person who provides this safety becomes associated with regulation rather than dysregulation. Being around them helps the avoidant feel more like themselves rather than triggering them to become defensive or distant. This creates a positive feedback loop where the avoidant actually seeks out closeness because it improves their overall well-being rather than threatening it. As their attachment system heals in the presence of consistent safety, the avoidant begins to access emotional capacities they didn't know they possessed. They become more empathetic, more emotionally expressive, more capable of genuine intimacy. But this growth happens organically, from the inside out, rather than being forced or demanded by external pressure. The transformation is so fundamental that the avoidant often doesn't recognize themselves in this relationship. They might think, "I'm not usually like this," or "I don't know why I'm so different with you," not realizing that they're experiencing their authentic self freed from defensive programming for the first time. The specific qualities that create safety for avoidance. The person who inspires irreplaceable safety in an avoidant possesses a unique combination of qualities that directly address the avoidant's core fears and needs. First and most importantly, they demonstrate consistent emotional regulation. They don't become reactive when the avoidant needs space, doesn't take their withdrawal personally, and doesn't punish them for having different emotional rhythms. This person respects boundaries without making the avoidant feel guilty for having them. When the avoidant says they need time alone, this person responds with understanding rather than hurt feelings. When the avoidant isn't ready to discuss something emotional, this person trusts their timing rather than pushing for immediate resolution. They also demonstrate secure attachment themselves, which means they don't need the avoidant to regulate their emotions or take responsibility for their happiness. They maintain their own emotional stability and fulfillment, independent of the avoidant's behavior, which removes the suffocating pressure the avoidant usually feels to manage someone else's well-being. Perhaps most crucially, this person understands that the avoidant's way of loving is different, but not deficient. They recognize and appreciate the avoidant's unique love language, showing care through actions rather than words, demonstrating loyalty through consistency rather than grand gestures, expressing intimacy through presence rather than emotional disclosure. This person also maintains their own life, interests, and relationships outside of the romantic connection, which proves to the avoidant that loving them won't require sacrificing autonomy or individual identity. They model how it's possible to be deeply connected while remaining fundamentally whole and independent, why avoidants become possessive of their safety source. Once an avoidant has experienced genuine emotional safety with someone, they often become more protective of that relationship than they've ever been of anything else in their life. This isn't conscious possessiveness or controlling behavior. It's an unconscious recognition that this person represents their only access to sustainable intimacy and emotional well-being. The avoidant realizes, often without fully articulating it, that what they have with this person is irreplaceable. They understand that finding someone else who can provide this level of safety is extremely unlikely, not because such people are rare, but because the specific chemistry that creates safety is unique to this particular dynamic. This protective instinct manifests as increased investment in the relationship, greater willingness to work through conflicts, and reduced likelihood of triggering their usual flight response when challenges arise. The avoidant, who normally runs at the first sign of relationship difficulty, will instead fight to preserve the connection that provides their safety. They begin to prioritize this relationship in ways that surprise everyone, including themselves. They make compromises they've never been willing to make before, show up for their partner in ways they've never shown up for anyone else, and demonstrate levels of commitment they didn't know they were capable of. This isn't codependency or unhealthy attachment, it's healthy recognition of value. The avoidant has finally found something worth fighting for because it allows them to be their authentic self while also experiencing deep connection. They're not clinging to this person out of fear or desperation, but out of wisdom and appreciation for something genuinely precious. The fear of losing their safety becomes their greatest motivator. The thought of losing the person who provides their emotional safety triggers the avoidance attachment system in a completely different way than typical relationship fears. Instead of activating their flight response, the possibility of losing this safety activates their fight response, not to fight against the relationship, but to fight for it. This fear motivates behavior changes that seemed impossible before. The avoidant who never communicated their feelings starts sharing their inner world. The avoidant who never made future plans starts talking about long-term goals. The avoidant who never showed vulnerability starts asking for support when they need it. These changes aren't performative or strategic. They're authentic responses to the realization that losing this safety would mean returning to a life of emotional hypervigilance and isolation. The avoidant understands that they've found something that allows them to exist in their most natural state, and the prospect of losing that feels like losing themselves. Why this creates an unbreakable bond. The person who provides genuine safety to an avoidant doesn't just become important to them. They become essential to their continued emotional evolution and well-being. The avoidant recognizes that this relationship has allowed them to become a version of themselves they never knew was possible. And they can't imagine voluntarily returning to the defended, isolated existence they lived before. This creates a bond that transcends typical romantic attachment because it's based on fundamental nervous system compatibility and mutual enhancement rather than just emotional or physical attraction. The avoidant has found their emotional home, and once they've experienced what it feels like to truly belong somewhere, they can never go back to homelessness. The safety this person provides becomes the foundation upon which the avoidant builds their capacity for all future emotional growth and connection. Losing this person wouldn't just mean losing a relationship, it would mean losing access to their own potential for intimacy and authentic self-expression. This is why avoidants can never truly leave the person who inspires genuine safety in them. That person has become synonymous with their ability to love and be loved, with their capacity for growth and healing, with their hope for sustained happiness and connection. They're not just losing a partner when this relationship ends, they're losing their faith in the possibility that love can feel safe and sustainable.